Texas barbecue fans. Here we are at Mueller Barbecue in Taylor, Texas. This is probably ground zero for all of Texas barbecue. The history of this place right here is just phenomenal. I mean, you've got so many family trees coming out of, so many pitmasters coming out of this building alone. Today, I don't know what it's probably about 3:15 in the morning. We're fixing to go in and we're going to see if we can get with Wayne Mueller, see if he'll show us how to trim a brisket, maybe, you know, prep it and get it ready to go on the pit. So hey, I hope you enjoy the video. If you do, please like it, share it with your friends, invite people over to our page. Okay, we'll see you guys in a few minutes. Okay, here we are. We're moving inside. Let's go see if we can find Wayne. Morning, Wayne.
Good morning, gentlemen. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Hey, we come out to see you this morning. This is Joe, my son.
Joe, what's up, brother?
How's it going?
The Texas barbecue fans would like to come in and see how you're doing this morning, and maybe see if you can show us how to trim a brisket.
Yeah, trim a brisket. Yeah.
Okay, you know, let's do the basics.
Okay. Well, I've got a few things prepared already, so let me grab the brisket real quick, and then I'll be back and let's get this underway.
All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay, Wayne. Well, you got a brisket ready for us. Certainly appreciate it. Tell us what we're doing first.
Oh, we're loving the brisket. That's what we're going to do first. Yes, this, you know, when you buy a brisket from the store, you're going to see it cryovac in a very similar way. You know, I guess we could start out, if we're going to trim out a brisket, we're going to complete it through a rub. Let's start it maybe with how you pick one out. You know? So, fortunately, all of our briskets come in pre-boxed, pre-weighed, within a certain weight range. But if you don't have a meat supplier and you're not using that volume of meat, going to the store or talking to your butcher, you may have to call through a whole array of picked over briskets to find one that you like. Generally, the things that I look for as thick of a flat on its thinnest side. This one's got maybe about an inch or so, and I'll show you why that's important a little later. Has some good marbling through the lean. It's good flat, there's no cuts, there's no gouges in the surface area, so we don't have to worry about it being splayed open and drying. It's a nice size, plus we have generous amounts of fat over the point. Okay. So as far as I'm concerned, this dude, he comes almost show ready. We won't have to do a whole lot to him, but as we do, I'll tell you what we do. No matter, all briskets are the same. What you're trying to accomplish is the same, and that's you're trying to take something that looks somewhat homogeneous but isn't, and make it as homogeneous as possible, both in shape, size, height, etc. So when we decant, I always turn my brisket upside down, pinch, allow some air in. I never cut the meat. It's an easy plastic. This dude is about 14 pounds, so he's going to finish out somewhere in the 7-pound range, 6.5 to 7 pounds, just depending how much fat we're going to have to trim right here. This is the bulk of what we're going to trim. So when I start out upside down, because really all I'm doing, I'm taking one cut component from the bottom and then I'm done. So we'll start in this area. What we see here is an outcropping of this intermuscular fat that separates the flat from the point. You see it, there's an outcropping here that's usually fairly large. On the back side of this flat, you have another outcropping. So we try to remove this, and the reason we try to remove this, because it does no benefit to the cooking process at all. In fact, it allows for extra fat, an extra fat layer, which generally people are not looking for when they're consuming the flat, the lean. So the way we handle this is fairly simple. We just cut through. sort of heel of fat that's now been removed. And this is a very hard fat. You'll see in a little bit what we do with our trimmings. This is some fat that I will not use for any reason. Except, well, I take it back. We make candles. We'll grind this, down to a chili grind, and then we render it, we strain it, we render it some more. I tell you more, I have to kill you. But we make 100-hour candles out of 100% beef tallow. This is it. Amazing stuff. Now that's what you talk about. Having an ecological barbecue establishment. Somebody who's caring about the landfills. So now that we've finished the bottom half of this brisket, really all we have here is the top section. There's a couple of things that we need to try to accomplish. One is, when we don't have much in the way of protein mass here, cooking it doesn't do us a whole lot of good because it's not a sellable component. It lowers our actual consumable yield. So we want to try to block this in a way that we get about an inch worth of protein across the entire front surface. Now, because of the way of the butchering technique, we see this section here tapers off. So unfortunately for this section, it's the end that gets a little shaved. So I start by bringing down. This shaping is more about, this isn't about being aerodynamic, by the way, because the air is coming from the back over to the top, not the front to the back. This is about getting me a good servable yield. Here we have at least an inch of protein, up to an inch and a half, inch and 3/4. We are also looking at just almost a tremendous, almost a perfect cover fat of 1/4 inch to about a 1/2 inch. I may trim a little off here, and I'll show you how we go about doing that, but this already has just a tremendous, I think, perfect covering as is. So we're not actually going to have to do much trimming across its brow. So what this does, if you'll notice, it sort of makes this brisket, when we trimmed off this section, right? So we trim this off, it's not splayed out as much. It makes it more uniform in width. This is beneficial because the width of our pit is only just under 4 feet. We really need every bit of space so that we can hit brisket, space, brisket, space, so we have airflow coming both through the sides, over the top, and under the bottom. This is really about trying to regulate airflow anywhere on the pit. Now, initially when we lay them in, they may actually touch, but during the process they will start to contract. These muscle fibers will pull up. This thing will start to sit up higher. You see it start to tense up, and it does begin to shrink. And when that happens, we create air lanes on either side of the brisket. Beautiful thing. So now, we've seen that this part of our flat looks wonderful. What I will do oftentimes on this back section is I will cut down a guideline. What do I mean by a guideline? Oh, time's up. Tune in next week. No, a guideline just sort of gives me an idea of how far back and how far down my protein is. So I can see here about how deep the cover fat goes, which gives me some sense of how deep I would need to trim on any of these areas. There's one ribbon, there's one side of a brisket that always has more cover fat than its opposite side. It's generally the same side that you just cut this giant hunk of fat off of. That side is generally the heavy fat cap on a brisket. Just know that. It just makes your searching a little bit easier where you're cutting. From this point, all we're looking to do is come down a little bit at a time. Why over trim? If you cut in too deep, it's not, I mean, if you have a sort of a flap, you're okay. It's when you gouge out and leave a barren hole, leave a shiner, is what they call them in ribs. You leave a shiner, then you leave a naked piece of moist meat exposed. And even while we try to create bark over the top of it, it's still not moisturized at all when we render fat to sit on top of it and baste around it. So I would always recommend going in thin sheets, moving away from you, and cutting down to a desired level using this, sort of like the person who cuts your hair. When they do that sort of guide run right down the middle and then they base all the other cuts on it, that's sort of what this is, right? And so you'll utilize this and say, okay, I need a little bit more on the side. Yeah, take a little bit more off the back. Yeah, and then you're the happy barber instead of the happy painter. I want you to think just a second about how we cook brisket in Texas. And what was the quantum technological leap in brisket evolution in the 1950s? And where it resided was in switching pits from something like that to something like this. Why is that important? Both of these are offset pits, so there's no direct or radiant cooking done at all. It's all done by convection heat. That one cooks from the bottom up. The air goes out of the box into the chamber and straight out of the exhaust. So think about it, it's sort of an inverted waterfall. All the heat's being transferred from the bottom. Not much heat is being transferred to the top. In this environment, what's going to happen is you're going to overcook this flat, you're going to undercook this point, and you're going to have a chewy, dry piece of meat that's going to need sauce, chopping in a bun. This changed all of that because this allowed air to flow not from the bottom, but from the side. Why is that relevant? It's relevant because if all of our air and most of our heat transfer is coming in all of these areas where air is literally slamming into this brisket, then what are we trying to accomplish by that? We're trying to transfer more heat here than we are over here. Why is that? Because this is twice as thick as this, so it takes much more energy to reach this section than it would to reach this same section from the opposite end. What does that mean? Well, we have a lot of fat to render here. We have a lot of fat cap to render, and we have a lot of intermuscular fat to render. It takes a lot of energy. But pouring that much energy in the flat, and you're going to torch it. There's not going to be anything left. So this allowed people to cook in a way that literally cooked the brisket at multiple temperatures at the same time. There's not much in the way of radiance here. Why? Because our exhaust is enormous. It's as wide as the pit. It's stepped up like a chimney that you would find in a house. This allows for, there's physical properties that create vacuums. Venturi effect does occur as we get up higher. You'll have a vortex starting to form. You'll have vacuum pulling air out and out of the stack. It's a beautiful thing. But it keeps air moving across. There's not much ambient temperature. Most of the cooking is done just with the hot air. So, in this environment, we have a conundrum. There's no rotation. So, in this area, it may be 325 degrees. In the back area, it may be 220 degrees. These dudes have to go on march. So they go from the back line to the next line, to the next line, to the front line, and back. All of that exposure to all of that frontal heat means that this face of this brisket, this top of this point, the more fat you have here, the better protected this entire point is going to be. So if you'll notice, I have quite a bit of fat just coming off of this back end. I'll take some of this. I'll gladly take some of it, but I'm not going to take all of it. And I'm certainly not going to take much more than this. And the reason being, this will all render out. So I keep from this very tip of the point as much as possible to about this crest. I will keep it 3/4 of an inch on a high end, because I know that it's going to take that sort of heat of use, and it's actually going to do some magic with it. It'll create a little bit more fat here, but the caramelization that occurs is just amazing. So if it has more than 3/4 of an inch, I will take it down. If it has less, I pray. We all should pray every day for a healthy cow to come through. Now, the last thing that I will do to this particular brisket is, once again, I'm looking on this side, I will take off this excess. And the reason I do this, so now he looks streamlined. Yes, he is streamlined. He will look uniform compared to all the others that I trim out. I have with me mostly protein, mostly fat. This is separated. This stuff, sausage. We make our own sausage, so that's the beauty of that. This, some of the fat goes, the cover fat. This stuff, softer fat, goes for me. This dude, trash. So so just to review real quick, when you're choosing a brisket, make sure that there's no gashes in it. Make sure there's not big heavy folds where there's a crease. Sometimes you can see. Try to get the thickest flat you can. Look what kind of marbling there might be through here. If you can find any white along the flat, it's going to be you're going to find more fat intermixed in the point as well. So look for those fattier cows. Look for the size that's best for you, and know that through the trimming and cooking process, you're going to lose about 50%. So cooking is another show, but to wind this one up, I will show you how we rub this.
Wayne, whenever you took this out of it out of your cooler, is there any need for one of our guys, if someone at home wanted to do this, do they need to trim it up at a certain temperature? Can they let it sit out for 30 minutes, or what's best? What do you think is best?
Well, if you have a cold room to prep this in, I would advise that every single time.
Okay.
Unfortunately, we do not. We do not have space, and most people in my position don't have that space either. So what we do is we bring them out a case at a time, we trim them up, we rub them, and they go back into the walk-in. And they'll sit there probably for a day, maybe two. Not because we're trying to allow any sort of brining or seepage of ingredients into the meat. It's just all about having them prepped out and ready to go when we need them, so they can go directly on the pit when called.
Okay.
Now, for us, something I've said often is we use a lot of black pepper. We use so much that we consider it a fifth food group. This is our Louis 9-1 rub. This is 16 mesh black pepper and iodized table salt. That's a lost one. Iodized table salt. You know how hard it is to find iodized table salt? It took me months. I have to special order this. So, because we are liberal with this, I won't be dainty. We literally coat it as thick as possible over the entire cut of meat. Why do we do that? It seems like overkill. Seems like a whole lot of pepper. Well, this is part of the magic, right? So the beauty of this cover fat is when heat activated and it begins to both render and then to dry. When the fat begins to start to dry, this fat caramelizes into a sweet. It's a sweet sort of fat that's reflective usually of the diet of the cow. The finishing lots feed a whole lot of corn. And corn is extremely sweet, as we all know. And it shows up in these cows that finish on grain. So this cover fat literally begins to render and melt. As it does so, all of this pepper that's sitting on top, it doesn't just sit there forever. Once it loses the integrity of the structure underneath it, which is hard cover fat, once it goes liquid, it settles into it. It literally is submerged in these layers of fat. The fat is then continually cooked and caramelized over the top of it. So you have, essentially, you've created concrete. You've taken cement and added an aggregate like gravel to act as a binder. That's what this pepper does. The taste, which is the most amazing thing to people, is you taste more salt than you do pepper, even though there's relatively only a small amount of salt in this. Why? Because you're not getting the pepper until you bite the pepper. And it's only upon biting it that you activate a part of the pepper that's not coated in fat, that you can actually taste some of the pepper. So it comes out in these microbursts, but so many of them happening all at once as you bite the bark. And it's just an incredible experience. I can't take credit for it. I can only take credit for not screwing it up. It is simple. It is salt and pepper. It is post-oak. It is a lot of love, and it is just for you. So I would say this is what you need to try. Get out there in your green egg, on your Weber, whatever you got at home. It doesn't matter. You just have to start with the first one and keep trying. Keep trying, and eventually you're going to hit it, I promise. We all do.